So welcome to tonight's Bleus Literary Salon. Thank you all so much for calling in and joining to listen to all of these amazing readers tonight. And we have 6 fantastic readers for you. We have Ayelet Tsabari, Timothy Miller, Rachel Vorona Cote, Anna Dorn, Brad Fox, and Daphne Merkin. So I'm going to pass it over to Ayelet to get us started. And I have a special thank you because Ayelet is are you in Jerusalem, is that right, or Tel Aviv?
Yeah, I'm in Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv, so it is 1 a.m.?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for staying up late to give us this reading. I really, really, really appreciate it. And we've been trying to set a date for a couple of years now, haven't we?
Yeah,
so
originally I was supposed to be there physically.
Yeah.
That didn't work out and it's the right timing.
Yeah, so this is perfect. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for staying up so late.
Thank you for inviting me.
Over to you.
Thanks. So actually I've been up late because I've been teaching all week from Canada. So I've been, it's kind of, my time is all flipped. But that's it. Tomorrow I'm going to switch it back to normal. And I am going to read today from my memoir that came out last year, a memoir and essays. It's called The Art of Leaving. And it's, I wanted to read something that I don't usually read. So I'm going to read from an essay titled Tough Chick. And I'm starting to further confuse things. I'm starting from a bit later in the essay. So I can tell you that it's after a physical assault on a bus. And I know that sounds, not happy, but actually it's kind of a love story. So this is the part that I'm reading. So that's why I'm reading it. Yeah, so I'm going to just jump right in. Just when I think it can't get any weirder, I look up and see Sean. He pokes his head into the bus and asks the driver, "Are you leaving soon?" I stare at him for a moment, think I'm seeing things. Perhaps I have a concussion. This can't be real. This is like a B-grade Hollywood movie. Then I let out a gasp and run to him. Forget I was ever mad at him. Forget I wanted to break up. I have spent years training myself to unlearn the shit I was taught by fairy tales and romantic comedies. I didn't need to be saved by anybody, especially not a man. I could take care of myself. But now Sean's here and I feel safe and grateful. My cry escalates as I dash through the aisle and down the stairs. He opens his arms to catch me like a safety net at the bottom of a skyscraper. "How did you know she was here?" Jessica's eyes widen as I bury my face in his chest. "Magic," Sean says. The police never come. The bus driver says he's called, but it's been a while and nobody's coming. It's a bit anticlimactic. No sirens winding down the streets, no police cars parked on the curb, their lights blinking orange on the pavement. Lights burn yellow holes in the dark buildings. My clothes are beginning to dry, but I'm still shivering. "Let's just go," I tell Sean. "We should call an ambulance," Jessica says. "You can't just go." "An ambulance?" I snort. "That's crazy. I'm fine." Sean flags a taxi and takes me to the free clinic. The doctor I see helps me pull clumps of loosened hair from my head, checks for fractures and bleeding, grimaces at the bruises on my torso, and examines my 2 black eyes, my Halloween Zorro mask. Forgot to mention it was on Halloween and it was on a bus. "There were 3 of them, you say?" He shines a blinding beam into my eye. "Well, I was in the Israeli army, I slipped back into my tough chick act. I've been playing this role for so long that it takes no effort. It stuck the way my mother warned me my eyes would if I kept crossing them. Even as I sit in the examining room, a part of me can't believe I didn't win this fight. I wouldn't want to be the other guys." The doctor winks at me, and for a moment, my confidence is restored. Trauma sneaks up on you the way water slides under a basement suite door before it floods. A couple of hours after the assault, I do a little belly dancing move for Sean, and we drink whiskey at his house like every other night and laugh about the stupid fight we had the night before. I'm sorry, he says. I freaked out. I freaked out, I say. I enjoy hanging out with him on a Saturday night. I usually work on weekends. I feel like I'm playing hooky. I ask him to take me to my favorite restaurant for food and martinis. I might as well get the most out of my night off. But it's the night of the parade of lost souls, and we sit by a window and watch skeletons and ghosts and witches. And there are people in the restaurant, chatter and music, and a waiter who keeps asking if everything is okay when nothing is. I'm glad I have my glasses on to blur the edges of my black eyes. I look down whenever someone meets my gaze. I still think I'll be okay tomorrow. The next morning, I wake up bawling like someone has just died. I don't want to wake up Sean, so I slide out of his embrace and go cry in the shower. When he gets up, I suggest we go out for a coffee. I figure I should be fine. The coffee shop is only 2 blocks away. But while waiting in line, I start to feel lightheaded. My face is washed with sweat and everyone is staring, probably wondering why I'm wearing sunglasses indoors on a rainy day. There's no air in here, I tell Sean, leaning into him. My heart is beating so fast it hurts. I think I'm going to faint. Take me home, I say. After 1 week at Sean's, I go back to my own place. I'm afraid that if I stay too long, you'll beat me up, I tell Sean, and we both laugh. We've only been dating for a few months and he probably needs his space. It's not like he's my boyfriend. Also, I'm not used to having someone else take care of me. Sean walks me home. You sure you'll be okay? He asked at the door. I can stay. No, I'm fine. I turn to open the door and pause. Oh, and thanks, I say, and look him briefly in the eyes for everything. I live in a tight community and word gets out fast. As I begin going out for groceries and errands, people coo at me on the street, tilt their faces and ask in their most compassionate voices, how are you? I take to walking the alleys, staring at the sidewalks, screening my calls. Constable Louis calls a couple of times to check up on me. I never knew cops did that. It's November and it's raining nonstop, dripping from the drain pipes, tapping on the windows, dribbling like a runny nose. Everything is so gray, I forget we have mountains. Did I mention it was in Vancouver? It's in Vancouver. I watch TV for hours on end and it lights my apartment in cold, unfriendly blue, like the innards of a fridge. I cry while watching Friends. I'm not going back to work because I'm still hurting and because I'm afraid I might throw food in people's faces. When they ask for more water, I'll empty it over their heads. This anger is bad for business. When I do answer my phone, I put on a light tone. I've been making jokes from day one. Well, in my country, when you get on a bus, it could explode, I tell people. Maybe getting beaten up isn't so bad. It's funny because it's true. I realize this is what I've grown used to in Israel, that air of menace, the ever-present threat, taste of my heart in my mouth. It's like I'm always waiting for something to happen, ready for a fight, wanting to wage war with the day, the world, or a person, as though a part of me longs for the risk. That shard of glass in the sand that catches your eye, a promise, an assurance that I am alive. I repeat the joke while talking to a Lebanese friend. Our neighboring countries have been at war for generations, but we've been living outside long enough to know we're essentially the same people. When I talk about my home, he just hears home. Well, maybe so, he replies, but at least back home, people would have helped you. I sink into silence. He's right. Maybe it's the belief that our enemies are out to get us that makes us feel united like a family, that makes strangers risk their safety to break up a fight, offer you money when you're short for the bus, share their food with you on a train ride simply because you're sitting next to them. I once broke up a brawl myself in the beach restaurant where I was working. pulled one man off the other, and stood between them with my tray as a shield. Walking back to the section, I was pleased with myself for saving the day. In fact, I think that's what compelled me to speak up on the bus when I did. Those teens terrorized the bus, and I wanted to be the one to put an end to it. Later that evening, I shared this insight with Sean. We sit on the couch, takeout containers perched in our laps. How arrogant is that? I wave my fork. I need to learn to shut up. Sean shakes his head. Sounds to me like you called an asshole, he says. Don't ever stop doing that. That's why we all love you. I note the royal we, the use of the word love. I stare down at my curry. Trauma is a bit like falling in love. It's sneaky, astounding, and unstoppable. And I should know, because in my case, these two are sliding in parallel streams under my door. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened between us if Sean hadn't shown up on the bus, if he weren't there to catch me. I'm trying to hold on to my act, stay cool, but it's like Sean can see past my armor. Sometimes I get so shy around him, I can hardly look him in the eye. Everything in my body is telling me to make a run for it. This love business is trouble. It's like a huge revolving siren is flashing red above his head. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayelet. I don't know if you can see, but everybody's clapping and waving. That line about trauma is like seeping in, something under the door. I know I'm not saying it correctly, but wow, that's going to sit with me for a while. Thank you. That's really amazing. I really appreciate that section. I'm going to, so for everybody, I'm going to paste the link here in the chat for Ayelet's book. So please support writers right now during this difficult time in independent bookstores. And thank you again for staying up so late for us. I really appreciate it. And now I'm going to pass it over to Timothy Miller. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be among such an amazing lineup of fellow writers, so it's my pleasure. Timothy S. Miller, author of City of Hate. Can you see it? It's a noir crime novel set in Dallas, Texas in the 1990s. It was published in June of this year by Goliad Media Group. It features the self-proclaimed bastard son of Lee Harvey Oswald. And I am reading from the very first chapter. This is chapter 1 of City of Hate. I know he's dead because part of his skull is missing. I know he's dead because the room smells like blood. I know he's dead because a sudden sadness overwhelms me. I forget if Bob's someone I know, or perhaps I've stumbled onto the death of a stranger. The only time I feel this way is when there's a death in the family. Bob isn't really family. Then again, he is. I'm dizzy, my gut's burning up. My head's about to disconnect from my spine. I forget things I've known forever. I have pain in new places. Old scars start to fester, turning into new wounds. This is what happens when I need to face up to something. I compartmentalize it. I forget it. I move on with my life as though what I'm going through at this very moment isn't happening at all. His eyes are glazed over. No one's home. Not anymore. He'll never see light again through those eyes. They're empty. He's hollow. He's a shell. If I hold him up to my ear, I'll hear the wave of 1,000 oceans. I'm tempted to take the gun, to pry it out of Bob's hand. It doesn't belong there. If I take the gun, will it feel like a gun, or will it feel like something else? But none of this matters because I don't take the gun. Instead, I run out of his apartment, down the stairs, and vomit in a pile of leaves. I rid myself of the dim room, the dank air, the bloody prologue before decay, the reek of soiled clothes, and I'm running to my car, speeding off down the block, and the Dallas skyline's getting smaller and smaller. The only thing I know for sure is that I need to get away. I'm not comfortable here. This city turned on me. Driving down Ross toward my apartment, the evening bringing darkness, everyone I see wants nothing to do with me. Drivers, passengers, pedestrians, mechanics working on their cars, women, their hair all dolled up, nails done, leaving the salon, or they're immediately hostile. They want nothing to do with me. They want to tear me apart. I'm afraid. I'm opened up, exposed face to face with death, and I feel nothing at all. Death found Bob quick and swift. It gave him little warning, not a creep, but a pounce. He hadn't struggled. He hadn't fought it one bit, hadn't at any moment begged for mercy or forgiveness. There wasn't a trace of any of that, no trace of light, only darkness, the tried and true viciousness of death. I ignore stop signs, which means I've made it 2 blocks before a cop pulls me over. I watch the reds and blues mixing into oblivion, grip the steering wheel until it feels like it's going to break off into my lap, rotate my eyes from the rear view mirror to the windshield, from the rear view mirror to the windshield, until every scenario that I can possibly go through has been ridden into eternity. He gets out of the car. He walks toward me with his flashlight, his hand on his gun. He does all of these things slowly, almost floating, the wind scooping his boots off the pavement, sitting him at the side of my car. He asked me why I'm in such a hurry that I would so brazenly disregard the law of the land and the safety of others. I tell him I discovered my best friend dead in his apartment. Although it was staged to look like a suicide, I have a sneaking suspicion that it's cold-blooded murder. That isn't true. I tell him nothing. When he asks me why I'm in such a hurry, I tell him that I need to piss. I'm in a hurry to get home so I can take care of business. I say nothing about finding Bob dead in his apartment. I can't tell you why. I wish I knew. What are you running from, son? Is this a hypothetical question? When running my plates, had he produced a history of flight, incident after incident where reality was aversion, drinking myself into oblivion, when avoidance of everything went into overdrive? Incident after incident where alienation became me, when even marriage to the most beautiful, wonderful, dreamy woman imaginable couldn't tear me away from my self-destructive tendencies. What am I running from? At least I would have the brains about me to confide in someone I could trust, maybe like Gerald, someone who could give me good advice as to what I should do next. Again, the big answer is no. Instead, I drive to Lemon's apartment. He just got out of a 28-day stay at rehab because he got busted for exposing himself in Tsetse Park in front of an entire Girl Scout troop. The judge said he could go to jail or rehab. He chose rehab. Lemon can't stay sober to save his soul. A 35-year-old man who never grew up. He's one step away from moving back into his mother's house, and I'm going to ask him for help. These kinds of decisions don't make sense. I'm out of control, making random decisions without fear of consequence. I'm living my life by total chance. Heads, I do something rational. Tails, I do something irrational. and it's tails every time. I knock on Lemon's door, the barrage of lights being turned off and then on again, the routine of blinds being peeked through, these rituals of the paranoid flawlessly perfected and carried out until the nerves settle down and the door opens to a crack. For the longest time, he just stands there, his long hair and his face stringy and hopelessly unwashed, looking at me through the crack in the door, uncertain of whether he'll let me in or not. I know, he says, I haven't been to a meeting. I'm depressed. Shut up, Lemon, I say. That's not why I'm here. There's this moment of silence when he looks at me, stunned, the kind of look reserved for the dead, like I'm not who he thinks I am. He closes the door, removes the chain, and he opens the door once again. He's in serious trouble, Lemon. It's like looking at Bob all over again, but with a pulse. He hasn't eaten, he hasn't showered, he needs to be locked up. I'm suicidal, Lemon says. He motions me inside, motions me to take a seat. I've been thinking about blowing my brains out all afternoon, and you treat me like I'm a piece of shit. Why do you want to kill yourself? I say. Lemon says, because I have so much going for me. I'm depressed. How was I supposed to know they were Girl Scouts? The uniforms, I say. So they were dressed alike, but that's not all. I'm depressed because I'm under a goddamn microscope. They come into my apartment and tell me I need to clean up after myself. It's like I'm in kindergarten, cock-sucking caseworkers. I need your help, I say. Lemon's apartment is a mess. There's shit everywhere. Lemon Pickens doesn't give a rat's ass that cleanliness is next to godliness. I move an empty pizza box off the couch so I can sit down. Your caseworkers have a point, I say. It wouldn't hurt to clean up a bit. Back off, Lemon says. And if you're trying to make a good impression with the court, I say, you might consider taking the framed picture of Lee Harvey Oswald off of the top of your television. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Oh, that's really descriptive and super interesting internal conflict and dialogue there. Thank you so much for reading that for us. I'm going to paste the link into the chat here. Sorry, I did that incorrectly. Paste the link into the chat there for everybody. So please buy this book. Thank you again, Timothy. So now I'm going to pass it over to Rachel Vorona Cote. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Paige for bringing all of us together. I'm going to read from my my first book. I guess I say that optimistically. You know, hopefully there'll be more than one. It came out in February, and it is called Too Much: How Victorian Constraints Still Bind Women Today. So it's a little, it's predominantly cultural literary criticism, but with a little bit of personal narrative too. So I guess I'm just gonna read the first 7 pages of the book from the first chapter. A weeping woman is a monster. So too is a fat woman, a horny woman, a woman shrieking with laughter. Women who are one or more of these things have heard, or perhaps simply intuited, that we are repugnantly excessive, that we have taken illicit liberties to feel or fuck or eat with abandon. After bellowing like a barn animal in orgasm, hoovering a plate of mashed potatoes, or spraying out spit in the heat of expostulation, We flinched in self-scorn. Ugh, that was so gross. I am so gross. On rare occasions, we might revel in our excess, belting out anthems with our friends over karaoke perhaps. But in the company of less sympathetic souls, our uncertainty always returns. A woman who meets the world with intensity is a woman who endures lashes of shame and disapproval from within as well as without. In Victorian England, the medical establishment would have labeled us hysterical, pathologically immoderate in emotional and physiological expression. Here's how a German-born doctor practicing in London, one Julius Althus, defined the condition in 1866. All the symptoms of hysteria have their prototype in those vital actions by which grief, terror, disappointment, and other painful emotions and affections are manifested under ordinary circumstances and which become signs of hysteria as soon as they attain a certain degree of intensity. Of course, a certain degree of intensity invites a vast range of interpretation, and when it came to emotional eruptions, the Victorians were none too generous. Hysteria was a convenient means of pathologizing, and thus regulating, feminine feeling and its expression. Today, as many among us grieve our political optimism and hammer out our anger on social media, we find our husbands, our boyfriends, our parents, our politicians diagnosing us with similar maladies. We're wallowing in it. Why are we so freaked out? We must be bleeding out of our wherever. Take a Xanax, girl, and calm down. We are the women who can hardly contain our screams, and oftentimes we don't. Our muchness oozes from our pores like acidic sweat, ranker, more caustic, less concealable than ever. But however brutally the stigma may sizzle in this political moment, this sense that we are somehow too much is hardly new to us, nor will it dissipate whenever Donald Trump's vise finally unclenches from our skulls. I conceived the idea for this book, a critical cry of bullshit against this concept, too much, some years ago during a comparatively happier presidency. This term, too much, pernicious in its ambiguity, attacks with the force of history. It's the over-determined exponent of ideologies, centuries old, structured by misogyny, racism, and homophobia. American society fetishizes white heteronormative propriety. It wants its girls pliable and demure, girls who safeguard both tears and sex for the privacy of the bedroom, who keep their voices measured during meetings, and who brush their hair and blot their lipstick. It worships the woman who, if she should experience distress, will wear her sadness like Lana Del Rey or Middlemarch's Dorothea Brooke, with genteel sensuality and relative quiet. Anything more, well, that would be excessive. Accordingly, "You're just too much" is the threat of patriarchy disguised as playful admonition. It is a warning, even a diagnosis. It is saying, this space is not yours to colonize. This power is not yours to claim. Systemic oppression relies on the careful partitioning of social space. Specifically, it requires that marginalized peoples, of which women are one broad example and women of color and queer persons are more pointedly targeted ones, dwell within corners, that we shrink inside walls that loom and compress. The public devises unspoken rules of deportment born from anxieties over what we can bear to see expressed, and accordingly, whom we are willing to allow the privilege of expression. Reluctant to countenance emotional and physical extremes in any case, women, long regarded as the lodestars of excess, are eyed like shapeshifters with the power to transform into Medusa. But I've since realized that there is power in what others call monstrosity. Our refusal to abide, to prioritize the comfort of the West's hegemonic governance, lays bare the rickety scaffolding of culture's so-called behavioral norms. The roots of rules are never so deep that they cannot be wrenched from the soil. Man-made boundaries remain at the mercy of the creatures who erected them. For when we are too much, and when we refuse to apologize for that, we burst against those walls and marvel as they give way like sand. I remember little about the circumstances of seeing Tim Burton's adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. It must have been 2010, because that was the year it was released and I saw it in a movie theater. My impressions were, and still are, few. Mia Wasikowska is a sweet-faced, impertinent Alice. It disappoints me that she and Anne Hathaway's White Queen do not embark on a love affair, though I'm certain they develop a queer affection. They're absolutely making eyes at each other, and you will not convince me otherwise. Tossing the Jabberwocky into the mix seemed a lazy narrative decision. But above all, in my recollection, there is the question of muchness, and whether 19-year-old Alice has retained it after her protracted absence from Wonderland and all the ravages and impositions of early adulthood. Muchness, what a word! It was new to my lexicon, and yet it seemed as if I had always known it, my kinship with it sensed, if not fully comprehended, as if its letters were threaded into my veins. But as I left the theater, I contemplated how, for Alice, the Mad Hatter, and the rest of her bizarro entourage, muchness, although vague in definition, evokes an unambiguously positive quality, something that surprised me even if I hadn't yet parsed the reason. Alice's muchness is her passion, her verve, and her courage. Lost my muchness, have I? Alice mutters to herself as she gingerly traverses the Red Queen's moat, littered with the petrified heads of her victims. When it returns, or had it ever really gone, she transforms into a mighty warrior, fit to slay a monster 50 times her size. When she returns to her conventional English milieu, this muchness also supplies her with the confidence to reject a marriage proposal in front of an expectant crowd and dash off in pursuit of a more auspicious future. From there, the film veers into regrettably imperialist territory, but in any case, Alice's muchness spares her a life tethered to a sniveling boob and instead sends her on adventures, like a mercantile Mary Kingsley. And fittingly enough, Kingsley is her last name in this adaptation. Had I, without context, been asked to describe muchness, I would have offered a definition shot through with censure and cruel self-assessment. Muchness, I might have told you then, was a characteristic, an affliction, possessed by those who were in every way too much. Too emotional, first of all, but also too exuberant, too loud, too talkative, too volatile, too brimful of desire. It also connoted mental illness, a genetic cocktail of anxiety and depression primed to seize the brain at any moment. The way I saw it, a woman plagued by muchness is likely to call her friend in a panic at 3 a.m., gripped by terror over seemingly trivial circumstances. She has more than once cowered in humiliation after someone has told her to lower her voice. Perhaps she is inclined to obsess or to engage in acts of compulsion. Maybe she's even depressed, masochistic. Probably she spends each day stuffing herself into an invisible carton more palatable to general company, like a jack-in-the-box where the head lolls outside the top, a smile slapdashed over a scramble of ugly, brambly feelings. And if my experience was any indication, she lives in perpetual fear of the time when those she loves will tire of her, when her muchness becomes cause for expulsion and renders her irrevocably alone. A few years later, I was working on a doctorate in Victorian literature, and inevitably, my eye always wandered to passages where female characters erupted with feeling, whether of love or defiance or fury. They were the women I preferred and with whom I felt an affinity, the ones who wept and feverishly declared their love and rarely apologized. After a tormented resistance, Tess Durbeyfield nakedly expresses her desire for Angel Clare, who, alas, is the unworthiest of feckless assholes. Catherine Earnshaw of Wuthering Heights is cruel to the bone, but I am endlessly in awe of her uncompromising and voracious demand for adoration. Most tellingly, Maggie Tulliver of George Eliot's Mill on the Floss, impulsive, sometimes baffled by her own excesses, became my Victorian avatar, textual evidence that the vigorous pulsing of my veins was perhaps not wholly incompatible with life. Though, if you know Maggie's tragic story, I realize this might seem an ironic comment to make. I detected too muchness in each of these characters and in so many more. Victorian literature breeds too much women, though I never wrote about it directly or even mentioned it for that matter. Graduate school seemed inhospitable to too muchness, privileging those who endured austere conditions of intellectual labor as if training for a bookish Spartan army. What a bizarre badge of pride. The first time a professor skewered my work, I thought, at least I didn't cry in his office. It would be unseemly, presumptuous, and a mark of excessive sensitivity in a context where one was expected to take her lumps with stoic submission. There was no space for Maggie Tulliver or Catherine Earnshaw in graduate school, and by that logic, I often wondered whether there was room for me, someone who attempted to be who she wasn't, measured, demure, cool, and who failed gloriously most of the time. But gradually, I spooned meager portions of hope into a theory that my maximalist personality, my muchness, was no reason for shame, but, dare I say it, pride. I had never forgotten about muchness, the word and the notion of it, and as I began to regard its assignations with timid dignity, I considered the possibility of a reinterpretation, one that summoned greater self-regard. Perhaps what others had condemned in me, what I had condemned in myself, this muchness, or because I thought of it in terms of fundamental excess, too muchness, held promise I was only beginning to discern. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I've been so excited to read this book for a little while now. Now I'm even more excited after that passage.
I just want to check with one thing. I went to an all-girls school that was founded in the Victorian era, and the biggest condemnatory remark that they would tell you was you were too much.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, it was the thing you could not be told. I just said it and it gave me a little goosebumps because like of traumatic memory of being a girl too much. So it's very, very fascinating and continues to this day. You're right.
And I love Leslie's comment there that we applaud your muchness. Thank you so much. I'm posting, sorry, can't copy and paste and talk at the same time. There we go. So we've got the link to Rachel's book in the chat there. Thank you again so much, Rachel. And now I'm going to pass it over to Anna Dorn.
Unmute myself. Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. Someone outside my apartment just like set up a de facto car wash right now, so I hope that you can't hear it. It's pretty annoying, but I actually do kind of want to get my car washed after this. So this is Vagabonde. It came out in May by Unnamed Press. It's about a lawyer who wants to be a rapper. She's a minimalist, not a maximalist. No hate, but you know, it takes all kinds. This is something I haven't read before. I just sort of picked it today, but it's a scene with her love interest towards the end of the book. Soon my nails are dry and there's a noticeable dent in the Lefroy bottle and my legs are draped on Nina's thighs and we're talking about Yumiko. She's my client, I blurt out. Then I feel ashamed and stupid. I drink alcohol to let my guard down and I hate it because it lets my guard down. What? Nina says. Off the record, I say in my serious lawyer voice. You can trust everything we've said tonight is off the record, she says. I'm ethical. Right, I say, same. That's a lie. I excuse myself to the bathroom where I pull out my Adderall bottle from my shiny gold bag. I turn on the water in case Nina can hear me. A few days ago on the phone, Jake Perez and I were discussing smoking joints, and I said I don't care for them. Some people enjoy the ritual of smoking joints in a social setting, he said. You know, like passing it in a circle, it's communal. Yeah, I'd said, and then thought, and I enjoy the ritual of swallowing pills alone in a bathroom. I stare at the neon blue 10 milligram Adderall and think about swallowing it, then decide to break it in half. I don't know exactly what time it is, but it feels late, too late to be taking a whole Adderall. I break the pill in half, taking care not to crack my nail polish. The sides are surprisingly equal. Whenever I break a pill in half, I take the larger half, but this time I can't discern the larger half, which makes me nervous. I worry that 5 milligrams won't be enough. Maybe I'll take 1/2 plus 1/4 of the second half, totaling 7.5 milligrams. That seems reasonable in my head. But just as I'm about to break the second half into a quarter, I feel irrationally sad about the quarter that will be small and alone in the pill bottle. Then I mumble, fuck it, and swallow both halves. I flush the toilet, then swallow some water in the sink. I stick out my tongue to make sure it isn't blue. All good. Did you fall in? Nina asks when I return. I stick my tongue out at her, confident that it shows no signs of my bathroom infidelities. That should be the name of the song. I sit down and grab my phone from the table. Hold on, I say. Inspiration, she asks. I guess she took off her jacket while I was in the bathroom, maybe earlier. The freckles on her shoulder twinkle under the palm tree's neon glow. Yeah, I say, looking into her eyes briefly, feeling frightened, then quickly looking down to text myself. When I look up, Nina's rolling a joint. Ennui slaps me on the leg. That's her cat. Perfect, I say. I could really use a mellow. I laugh at myself, first softly, then louder, then almost hysterically. You amuse yourself, don't you, she says. I work from home for a reason. So how did Yumiko become your client? She begins to lick the edge of the rolling paper, and I feel a tiny throb between my legs. Well, her name is Rachel, I say. The Adderall pulses, and I prepare to unleash a monologue. I assure myself that Nina is a journalist with an apparent journalistic interest in me, so I'm sure it will appeal to her, the impending monologue. Rachel Tafton. I work for the state of California. I forgot if I told you. I look at Nina and she shakes her head, then licks the rolling paper again. Okay, I say, you know what a public defender is, right? She cracks a condescending smile. Yeah. So when an indigent criminal, someone who has a public defender, loses their trial, the state is constitutionally required to pay for their appeal. Pennsylvania versus Finley established that right sometime in the late 80s, 1987, I think. The year I was born. Anyways, California has 6 appellate districts and a panel of available appellate attorneys for each district. I'm on the panel for the 2nd appellate district where Los Angeles lies. They say it's the hardest one to be accepted to, but I don't know who determined that or how. I look at Nina, who seems mildly impressed. She begins to light her joint, shooting me an expression that says, is it okay to smoke in here? Let's go outside, I say, I could use a cig. We get up and head to the balcony. Ennui follows. She's been needy as hell since her sister left. Outside, the air is cold and damp, but refreshing. Nina and I light up simultaneously. When she exhales, Ennui hops into a tree of smoke. The branches shake. I exhale and try to keep the smoke away from my cat. So Rachel Tafton was appointed to me. Sorry, that's like wrong. Okay, I was appointed to represent Rachel Tafton. I'm smiling. I think because of the combination of the amphetamines and nicotine and whatever else. Gun possession, I say. I have no idea why she has a court-appointed attorney because she seems rich. I'm surprised her parents didn't pay for it or something. She alludes to being in the gun trade, which I found alarming. I mean, you remember that night. Kind of, Nina says. I was pretty faded, but I remember the gold handle of her gun. Right, I say. It was pretty. It's not unethical, right? She asks, you being friends with your client like that, embarking on a creative and I guess financial endeavor separate from the case? I laugh nervously and then take a drag. As far as I know, there's no rule about being friends with your client, but I hadn't thought about the financial part. Jesus, how do non-lawyers always know more about the law than me? It's so embarrassing. I attempt to reason with myself. Nina's just a journalist and she's asking a question. She doesn't know anything. I make a note to look up the financial thing the next day. It's fine unless I sleep with her, I say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great dialogue, and I really like how you left us right there. And there are a lot of comments about that cover. It's such a great looking cover. Thank you. I'm going to post the link here. There, to Anna's book. So thank you again so much for reading, Anna. Now I'm going to pass it over to Brad Fox, who is in the jungle in Peru.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Brad.
Yeah, we had a router mishap. Anyway, I'm glad to be with you all and catch the last couple of readers. But okay, so I'm going to read from To Remain Nameless. It's a novel. What I'm going to read takes place in a labor and delivery ward in St. Luke's Hospital near Columbus Circle in New York City. So it's 2 women, Tess and Laura. Tess is watching her old friend Laura give birth, and most of the book takes place in Tess's mind. So when we drop into memory, that's what's happening. So I'm going to skip around a little bit with very minimal comments, but basically I'm just going to read. Okay. So Tess walked to the door and flipped the switch. So the only light was the red-green glow of the monitors, monitoring the quickening pace of the heart as Laura leaned forward and another contraction came on. Tess watched her eyes lose focus, all attention turned inward, the uterine walls tightening, pressing, opening the cervix. Laura emitted low groans. Tess stood up and walked over to her, put a hand on Laura's head and grabbed her left hand in hers, squeezing, letting Laura squeeze, looking down at her friend's face, contorted and hurting. Tess listened to the vacancies in her own chest, wondering what sounds she would make if her uterine walls were contracting, and wanted to crawl out of her skin at the thought. She lay a hand on Laura's sacrum as the nurse had done, and at the same time tried to feel within herself the place where this was happening, womb. It made her wince. So now she's remembering the time when she met her friend, 1999, the border between Macedonia and Kosovo. So Laura had arrived a few weeks before from Kinshasa and had no idea about the former Yugoslavia. To Tess, it was home. She'd already been working in Bosnia for 3 years, had flown in from Sarajevo where she'd lived with her brother the last 2, before that Banja Luka. It felt like hers by then. Not only her little apartment on Čačića Sokak, but the language she called Bosnian or Serbian or Croatian, depending on who she was talking to, or it was just your language, sometimes even ours. Laughing at the inside jokes of her Bosnian friends, the bands and movies, remnants of the old multi-ethnic socialist utopia, even Vardar, the name of the river they passed on the way to the border. She'd never seen it, but knew the name from old songs. It was swathed in a glow of associations Laura wouldn't understand. But all that faded as Tess saw 3 women trudging up from the edge of the forest toward the razor wire barrier 100 meters downhill. She watched Laura interrogate the guards at the checkpoint and envied her ability to keep calm as the sullen Macedonians shrugged and more men, women, and children gathered on the slope. "I should write my questions in lipstick across my breasts," Laura said. Then maybe he'd pay attention. Tess and Laura were friends by the time they drove back into the city, before Tess started her contract and they were up at dawn to run from site to site through the blazing heat of the summer. Then nights drinking cold wine on the top floor of the house up on Vodno, with its balcony overlooking the kidney-shaped pool next door. Sitting there after the endless days, cursing the clenched throat of Tony Blair as he promised more aid, until the unbearable heat would finally subside under the whir of the Apaches that hovered above downtown. "We should go on strike," Tess said. "Tell them fuck your relief budgets. We're not going to fight your war for you." Laura nodded and smiled as she refilled their glasses. "Exactly, let everyone starve, then they'll understand." It was the first time Tess had been under pressure like that, but Laura had believed in her right from the start. "You can do this," Laura told her. "You'll be great." When Tess had never seen real conflict before, the Dayton Peace Agreement was already in effect by the time she got to Bosnia. The work in Sarajevo was just pushing through process, return, and resettlement. Then everyone rinsing their heads in the basements and bars of the city. But now Tess found herself in a situation that was really happening right now. Adrenaline shot through her veins as she and Laura raced around in those white 4x4s, out to the camps along the border, kept an eye on the black market networks in the western mountains, occasionally escaping for a mad dash to Ohrid, DJ sets in caves and pink trout flipping in the lake, then in a rush back to the office to grab gear, corral staff, meet engineers, assess land grades as fields filled up with more and more tarps and tents. The backup in no man's land, rainfall on fetid corpses until the borders opened, and then they couldn't build camps fast enough. Tess ended up in the mountain villages bribing Mukhtars to house the overflow. They'd fix the road, build a school, whatever, but please, she said, house these people, they have nowhere to go. Until the bombs stopped dropping and everyone came down from the mountains and the camps cleared overnight. No one knew what was happening, if there would be mines and booby traps, but the refugees didn't care. They headed home as fast as they could, and the camps vacated overnight. Now there were new problems across the border: poisoned wells, unsafe houses, the dead and injured to be tended to, returnees settling scores, vengeance, more killing and confusion. Max showed up from Sarajevo, Laura headed to Pristina, and Tess stayed on in Skopje to administrate logistics. Her boss in DC called in with details for endless invoices. "Sign, sign, sign," he told her. "We need to get those supply lines moving." She signed order after order, huge shipments of lumber and medical supplies and vehicles. For weeks, she signed whatever came across her desk. "Sign," her boss told her. Only when the CIA auditor scheduled a meeting and her boss's line in DC went dead did she realize he and the local procurement officer had been collaborating on an embezzlement scheme. Tess was implicated and finally fired because of her signature on all those invoices. Sign, sign, sign. The adrenaline now froze in her veins. As she and Max packed up the house on Vodno, Laura called in on the sat phone from Pristina, describing columns of Serb tanks, soldiers flashing nationalist symbols as they paraded toward the border with Serbia proper, toward the small towns and isolated villages where Tess would find her next job, contracts one after another, meeting Laura again in Cairo, then in Istanbul, where they'd be colleagues in the late 2000s, those murderous years that seem quiet now because they came before all the uprisings. Now I'm going to skip to many years later where they are reunited in Istanbul. And they're living in the same building, one above the other. But that's... Laura had always seemed larger and more physically powerful than the men around her, even if that had made no sense. That bald merchant marine in Istanbul, sailing from Libya to Kotor to Cyprus, his head was so red and his eyes so huge and shaded. Ugly as sin, Laura said with a laugh, and all their bodies entwined, from Kansas City to Portland to Milan to Banja Luka, that first season in Bosnia, entwined like Laura in heart monitor wires, thrashing and pressing, all of them pressing together, that particular loneliness, waking up somewhere and feeling perfectly alone, getting a new job somewhere and feeling perfectly alone, the blotches and discolorations and abrasions, imprints of car seats and sofas, that motherly feeling sometimes when they come. Yes, baby, that's it. A laugh in it too, at their pride and vulnerability. All for this state that Laura was in, swollen and heaving, awash in these sweet and sour smells, the galloping heart of the unborn, something that was in them that spoke through them whether they wanted it to or not, a continuation of their own movement from here to there to there. As Tess grew older and less deluded and learned to sit in one place and feel the navel of the world grow around her, newcomers would appear with the same hunger and ignorance to scour and discard, to go out thinking they would find something or get away from something or become something. Tess in the green plastic chair could feel the heaviness of her hips, her sharp hip bones that pointed forward, her lower lip falling open. Laura on the hospital bed, thrashing heroically, this thrashing that ran through them. Even birth was a thrashing, squatting, rolling over, laying down, standing up, moving hips back and forth, pressing against something, pressing back against something. It was an amoebic form of reds and oranges, and it was greater than her, inside and outside, working through her body, unthinking, which is what made Tess go to Bosnia and Egypt and Turkey, and was even why she was here with her friend. She needed to be here and needed to go there in order to be here. She was sure of that, watching Laura's face and her eyes shut and her mouth. That's all for now. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Brad. Gosh, you left us on such an interesting, powerful piece of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of that really speaks to my day job, so it's really interesting to explore, and I'm really excited to continue to learn about those characters. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Brad, and for calling in from Peru in the beautiful space that you're in. I'm going to post, there we go. So there's the link for Brad's book in the chat there. And now I'm going to welcome Daphne Merkin. Over to you, Daphne. Daphne, you're still muted, so you'll have to just press that button on the... I can't unmute you myself, or else I would. There you go, perfect. We can hear you now, thank you.
I feel like this is my age. I'm like a dinosaur. I'm gonna read from a book of mine, a novel, my second in, this novel took me 30 years to write. I had written a much earlier novel and then went into nonfiction. It's called 22 Minutes of Unconditional Love, and it came out on Tuesday and got, if I may say so myself, to my shock, rave review in the Times. It's set before Me Too for a reason. And in the 1990s and early aughts, are they called aughts? And I'm going to go around in the book a little bit. It's told in flashback by a woman who is now pregnant with her second child and married, and she's looking back on a sexual obsession of her younger years. So this is the very beginning. In this story, there is no final scene, no decisive change of heart or firm resolve, so much as a furious inner struggle, a struggle that has left no discernible traces, yet has marked me as surely as bruises after a fall. Because there is no end to the hunger for unconditional love, and no end to my belief that he was the one to give it to me. I have no stopwatch to measure how long the experience of sexual pleasure, of losing yourself, lasts at any particular time. It could be 10 minutes or 15 or 22. How do you measure the crest of a wave? All I know is that when it vanishes, it leaves in its wake a devouring appetite for more. To this day, I can't forget how he was always touching me in bed. Sorry, that's my acting as though my skin came as a surprise. You feel so soft, he said, so smooth. Nothing very original in that, I realize, and yet coming from him, I felt it as a lovely succumbing, a weakening of his ordinary resistance. Then there is this. I am a writer, a believer in the powers of art to shape experience so that others might recognize something of themselves in it. Except when it comes to my own life, it appears. I have decided to tell this story now, after all these years, as a way of forcing it to the finish line. I am still confused about how I got to that place to begin with, and how I got out without going mad, howling like a wolf. I think it had something to do, despite all evidence to the contrary, with some intact shred of a life force. I willed him out of my life in order to pursue a more sane existence, one that would include a husband and children, a daughter I would bring up to feel full in herself, without vast absences or ravaging needs. But it was just that, an effort of will rather than a natural ending, only a sense that if I wanted to survive, I would have to move on. Meanwhile, the efficient little clock on my desk keeps marking the passage of time. If you pick up this clock, a practically weightless black brawn traveling clock with white hour and minute hands and a yellow second hand, and hold it close to your ear, you can hear a faint, even tick. So many days, months, and years have intervened, not to mention a marriage, the daughter I wished for, and another child on the way. You'd think he'd have no place in my thoughts anymore. And for periods of time, he doesn't, only to alight on my nerve endings once again. It has to do, I imagine, with the tedium, the worn routines that are an inescapable part of domestic life. Some habit of my husband's that I have tired of, such as the way he blinks his eyes rapidly when someone disagrees with him, or the way my daughter puts up an argument about something perfectly reasonable, like getting into her pajamas before bedtime. Suddenly a space opens up, a wedge of restlessness mixed with longing, and Howard Rose walks back in. In the beginning, we kissed. Everyone kisses in the beginning. It was only later that the other stuff came welling up between us like blood. Only later that I crouched on his bed and on all fours, his finger inside me, inside my vagina, as my daughter Sarah calls it proudly, syllable by syllable, befitting a child of these demystifying times. His mouth biting through mine as though it were a piece of fudge. His mouth was arguably his best feature, especially in repose, when it looked sensuous, the lips full and curvy, made for kissing. but everything changed when he smiled. I should explain that he had several kinds of smiles. There was the half smile when he was amused, receptive to the comic possibilities inherent in a given situation. Then there was his official pleased as punch smile, which made the whole lower half of his face recede and struck me as oddly sheepish. The smile I liked least was the one that spoke of nothing good, flickering across his face when he was about to be cruel. I still have the piece of paper torn from a notebook on which I faithfully recorded, ever the writer, even before I actually stepped into the role, duty-bound to police experience, to pin it down and handcuff it. His impression of my breasts. Luscious handfuls, he told me. I've been meaning to write this book for years. Sometimes I feel as though I've been carrying it around like a hump on my back, a hump no one can see. If I could keep myself from writing it, I probably would. But the truth is I can't anymore. It's the kind of tale I keep hoping to find already told by someone else with an invisible hump weighing her down until she can no longer stand it and hurls it off her and out into the world. But all I've read are fragments scattered here and there, a couple of pages buried in a novel, a paragraph or two in a memoir, pieces of the story, allusions, but never the whole shebang. And yet I know deep in my bones that this experience, this skewed impulse toward connection that lies somewhere between passion and annihilation, between fusion and combustion, is not mine alone. That it earmarks other women, those looking to affirm themselves through a man's eyes, and toward which end they will do almost anything. Some of the details contained herein I've been afraid to admit to myself. Others I've been afraid to admit to anyone but myself. Then there's my sense that I'm not supposed to be the kind of woman this happens to, all of which has made for difficulties, reasons to do other things than write this book. But now that I find myself pregnant again, the beginnings of a new life stirring within me, cementing my bond with my husband, Richard, ever more conclusively, at least from the outside in, hemming me into one way of life rather than another, I feel I must tell my story. I must write it down before it becomes too shadowy, a mere prelude to the main act of life in which I now reside, when the truth is that everything that has come all these years later often seems like a denouement. It's for myself, of course, that I tell it, but also for all of you who have stumbled into this kind of twisted love indistinct from madness, and reeled from its force. The way it threatens to destroy you, but also to infuse you with something vital, a feeling of completeness, an end to the never-ending struggle of being a person alone on the planet, separate inside your own skin, rather than merged with someone else. Obsession makes for good copy, they say. But what kind of life does obsession make for? That's the real question. And even more important, what kind of life do you live after you've given it up? Is it like being in a room with the lights turned permanently low, a less intense atmosphere that reminds you by its very pallor of the brightness you've lost? How sustaining, that is, are memories of passion, of erotic immersion. Can they last you a lifetime? Can you draw upon them at night in bed? His mouth bearing down on yours, his tongue or finger inside you, better to slick you up into a state of readiness. When you are sleeping next to a man you've never been obsessed with, but who is all the same, the man you've chosen to be with over the long haul. Or do these memories eventually fade like worn out stars? Then there is also this. How do you give up something that's nestled in your marrow, this particular taste in loving, one that is crisscrossed with hate, with specks of long ago humiliations endured but never forgotten? What I'm referring to is an appetite for a certain degree of abasement, being reduced to a panting, abject creature in the name of sexual pleasure. The fine-tuning of relative power that naturally obtains between couples, pitched way up into the insistent blare of one who dominates and one who submits. And then I was just going to go to one more. 1 second, because I can't find it, but I marked.
Never stop.
What?
Never stop.
Ever. I'd be a different person. I'd be like you. I'm going to go to the very, very end of the book. At the end of the book, the woman who's telling it, the older woman, it all goes into the present tense for the whole affair, where she meets him. That's what I was trying to find. She meets him at a party where Madonna is playing significantly. And, oh, okay, I did find it. I don't want to read so long. I could read the very end or a sex scene. Which do you suggest?
Both.
I'll go with the sex scene. You feel so soft, he whispers in her ear, slipping his hand inside the waistband of her pants and down under her cotton underwear. Now his hand is on the naked flesh of her ass, on her flesh, which is so soft. He circles a finger around her anus and then wiggles inside it. Do I, she says. No one has ever dared to do this to her before in public, in a movie theater, moreover. No one, that is, until Howard Rose. In the darkness around them, she hears breathing and whispers, the crunching of popcorn, but she might as well be alone on a desert island with this man. She is wet. She drips wetness like a leak. She has known Howard Rose less than 2 weeks. 10 days it must be. And already she is impaled on the end of his sexual spearing, trapped like a fly on sticky paper. She hasn't seen him for several days now, but it might as well be a Siberia of days. It's so cold without him. The movie they are watching is lightweight to the point of disappearing, a comedy set in a country house in France. All the women in the film have long tanned legs, and on several occasions, everyone gathers around a refectory table to eat delicious-looking stews that they mop up with crusty pieces of bread. She finds herself getting hungry just watching, and somehow this hunger morphs into a sexual hunger, a sensation of something dropping down deep inside her, creating a craving in her body. You're nice and wet, Howard Rose whispers, his breath smelling slightly of peppermint. I want to fuck you right now. He turns his head back to watch the movie. She stares at his profile, the leanness of his face, the blackness of his beard, and the incongruous lushness of his mouth. She is mortified and excited by the evidence of her senses, the stream that has started up between her legs, a steady stream of desire. Something in her is excited by his brazen impropriety, his disregard for the conventions of public behavior. The slight edge of contempt that underlies his daring excites her even more. They leave the movie before it's over and take a taxi to Howard Rose's apartment. This is only her second time there, and already she feels she's committed his one bedroom to memory. Will never be able to forget the way he drops his keys on the desk when he comes in, or the small half circle of a dining table right off the kitchen, or the batik spread on his low bed. He takes his clothes off in a flash, first his pants and his Calvin Klein underpants, men's underpants with their extra fold of cotton around the crotch, always put her in mind of diapers. then his sweater and shirt in one fell swoop over his head. She sits on his brown fake suede couch and watches his naked body appear in its sinewy yet fragile glory, a body that moves her in some way beyond the sexual, that makes her want to crush and be crushed at the same time. His thighs are long and taut, and his penis is well-sized and straight, set between full balls. She has come late to sexual activity, has imbibed her mother's stated disgust with the whole thing, and still thinks of erotic pleasure as untrustworthy, but sometimes the untrustworthy has an added appeal. "Come here," Howard Rose says. He has moved to his bedroom where he lies under the covers, patting the space next to him, then folding his hands behind his head. "I think I know what you want." "It's cold," she says, rubbing her arms. "Or maybe I'm imagining it." Her voice gives her away. It is thick with longing. This is still at the beginning of their involvement, before she has fully learned how little he can tolerate anything but the most appreciative of responses. She doesn't yet realize how unwise it is to play with him, to lead him on. "It's toasty in here," he says, patting the bed again, as though she were a dog getting ready to jump. "I should go home," she says. "I really should." She says this rhetorically, without meaning it, as a way of dignifying her desire for him. She is imagining herself as a container ready to be filled with warm milk, and Howard Rose is the spigot. That's what he makes her feel like, milky. They have been in bed together only once before, and already she is obsessed with him. When she goes into Barnes & Noble to study the racks of new books during lunchtime, novel after novel lined up in their shiny jackets, whoever will read them all, she is really thinking of him, repositioning herself in the erotic movie that's been running in her head ever since they met. She gets undressed slowly, self-consciously, undoing her bra, underwired 36D, to reveal her breasts, and then getting into bed with her virginal underpants, plain white cotton, not at all the knock-em-dead tiny bits of lacy lingerie her friend Celia sports. He pulls the underpants down over her hips, watching her all the while. When she is stark naked, he kneels and parts her legs carefully. He puts his mouth on her nipples, sucking one, then the other. She moves downward, takes his penis in her mouth, one hand circling its base, and runs her tongue round and round the smooth, slippery tip, then slowly up and down. She is trying for a hooker's expertise, a kind of erotic multitasking, calling on the wisdom from the issues of Cosmo she reads while waiting in the doctor's office or at the nail salon for her nails to dry. 5 ways to drive him crazy in bed, or the 3 sexual fantasies he won't admit to, or the 4 love spots every man wants you to touch. She moves back to stroke something she'd read about called the perineum, although she remains vague as to its precise location. Everyone knew about performance anxiety in bed, Judith had always thought. The way they were required to strut their stuff over and over again, while women had the option of remaining passive in bed, making grocery lists in their head, or conjuring up Brad Pitt. She supposed this was why women were taught to coddle the poor provisional male ego, always on the verge of wilting, why they were taught to gush about how big a perfectly ordinary penis was. What hadn't been sufficiently recognized, if you asked her, was that it was possible for women to be a flutter with their own version of performance anxiety. She closes her eyes when he moves down her body, preparing herself for the sensation, a mixture of pleasure and a touch of shame at the flicker of his tongue inside her. "Do I own you now?" he says into the silence, something he hadn't said the first time they went to bed. The truth is, she secretly wants to be owned, her independent woman demeanor notwithstanding, wants someone to take over inside her head and make her decisions for her, leaving her nothing to do but to follow the man holding up the sign saying, "Pleasure this way." How did he know that was what she wanted? And is it the men who know such things who are the real danger to women like her? His penis inside her feels like the missing piece, expressly designed to fill the chink in her armor. She wants to keep it for protection. The question is, whose protection, hers or his?
Thank you, Daphne. My goodness, you've really set us all up to have a really nice Saturday night. So thank you, especially for that.
Not with Howard.
I don't think any of us are surprised, excuse me, about the New York Times rave. So huge congratulations and thank you for reading to us. I'm going to post the link here. This book just came out on Tuesday, as Daphne mentioned. So make sure to order it. So thank you again, Daphne.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And a huge thanks to all of our readers tonight: Ayelet Tsabari, Timothy Miller, Rachel Vorona, Cote, Anna Dorn, Brad Fox, and Daphne Merkin. Please purchase everyone's book, support independent bookstores. Thank you all for calling in. And thank you so much for sharing part of your Saturday evening with us almost every Saturday since April. Which is pretty crazy to think that we've been doing this for that long. We're going to take a few weeks off from Les Bleus, these virtual editions, while I figure out how to carry this on into the future. So thank you all, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, for calling in and taking part, to the readers tonight, to all of the, gosh, I wonder how many, I should have done the math before, but I think there have been close to, I'd say about like 50 or 60 readers who've read over the last, I don't know how many weeks since April. So thank you for supporting everybody, especially these writers who've been really affected by this pandemic and have lost book tours and obviously all kinds of sales. So thank you so much for calling in. Thank you for reading. Thank you for taking part, for buying these books. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Good.
Good night.